not
Okay.
long.
Sorry, can you see me? So I'm just.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait. Oh, humility. Okay, it'll be about a minute. Okay. Humility and faith prevent anger. That's the subheading. The Orchos Tzadikim suggests that anger is rooted in arrogance, and a measure of humility can avoid anger. Most anger is a response to an affront to one's ego. Otherwise, what difference does it make if someone spoke to one in an objectionable fashion? Anger stems from the feeling of personal insult or degradation of one's honor. The more confident we are in ourselves, the more humble we are, and the less likely we are to become angry. Rav Godel Eisner Zatzal made an analogy to a feather and lead that are thrown to the floor. The feather flutters and gently and calmly lands, whereas the heavy lead falls quickly and breaks the floor upon reaching it. Similarly, a person who is calm and pleasant to others will be able to withstand a challenge and move along, like the light feather. The heavy and uncompromising person who is easily insulted and quick to get angry will, in an explosive rage, break relations with those around him. Humility and faith in Hashem will prevent anger. The person who believes that whatever happens is from Hashem, good or bad, would not rage at an insult, but would view the insulter as a temporary messenger of Hashem. Obviously, such faith does not absolve the messenger from moral responsibility for his behavior, but the believer leaves retribution to Hashem. Indeed, instead of getting angry at a faithful and humble person should try to understand the message that Hashem sends him, so he can become a better person. Such approach can avoid anger. So that's a very good level to aspire to. Hopefully, we can do it most of the time. Not easy, but that's well. It says in Pirkei Avot, slow to anger. One of the people is one of the good qualities.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, so
all right, guys. So we're on the 76th daf. The Gemara asks, "How do we explain Rabbi Shimon's ruling? Granted that Rabbi Shimon holds the argument, what difference does it make to me?" He's saying whether he sells it to an ordinary person or gives it to an ordinary person, or whether he sells it to Hekdesh, which is heaven, or whether he gives it to Hekdesh, and therefore holds that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for the act of consecrating the stolen animal. He should have said exactly the opposite. And what that means is, well, firstly, what should he have said exactly is that with respect to a consecrated animal for which the thief bears responsibility, because we said that he made a declaration, should anything happen to this offering, he will replace it. He's therefore exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment, since the animal didn't yet go out of his possession. Why didn't it go out of his possession? Well, if he offered to replace it, it technically means that he still has ownership out of it. It's not a complete transfer out of ownership of his domain. We use the example of a car. If you're still bearing responsibility and you sell the car, but the car papers are not in your name, then if any accident happens, you don't cancel your insurance because you're still responsible, even if you might have got the money until the car papers have been signed and sealed. But if the thief says he bears no responsibility if anything happens to the offering, but he's prepared to consecrate it, in that particular case, he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, according to Rab Shimon, for the consecration takes a stolen animal out of the possession and transfers it to the possession of Hekdesh. Okay? And therefore, if you're taking it from the personal capacity of the thief to Hekdesh, it's known as, Rabbi Shimon would say, that constitutes a sale, because a sale is anything that comes out from you and into somebody else, whether it's a gift or a sale, that's the same thing. So then the Gemara says, and it's posed as a question, it's not even posed as a statement, that's Rabbi Shimon's answer. So the Gemara basically answers, they said Rabbi Shimon is referring not to the preceding ruling of the Tana Kamma. So let's just see what the preceding ruling says, is that basically Rabbi Shimon agrees with the Tana Kamma that an act of consecration never constitutes an act of sale. So that's the bottom line. It was a question he had, but it never does. Why? because whether he consecrated the animal as an offering for where he bears responsibility or as an offering where he doesn't bear responsibility, even after the consecration, it's still called the offering of Reuven, the thief. What did we compare it to? Is if I sell an item to Kevin, it goes from Damon's item, Damon Kabb's item, to Kevin Mayerthor's item. That constitutes either a gift or a sale. However, if I'm donating the money to charity, it was Damon Kabb's money. Now the donation is made in the name of Damon Kabb to the shul for the parsha or whatever the case may be. So it's still under my name. So that's what it's saying, is that there's not really a consecration, never constitutes an act of a sale because it's still the same person. So in that case, Rabbi Shimon agrees with the Tana Kamma's ruling that a thief who steals an animal, consecrates it, and then slaughters it cannot, and I repeat this, be held liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, neither for the consecration itself, because it's not a sale, nor for the subsequent slaughter, because after consecration, it's no longer the animal's original owner that he's slaughtering. It belongs to Hekdesh. So in that case, the consecration happened first, and then the slaughter. So either way, he's not responsible for either. But what it's referring here to is a different matter where Rabbi Shimon differs from the Tana Kamma. So remember, the Tana Kamma is the general halachic opinion. Okay, so namely where the thief stole an animal that had already been consecrated by the owner. Okay, so that's the issue that we're talking about. We learned in the Mishnah in the 62b, okay, one who steals after a thief does not pay the twofold, nor fivefold, nor fourfold payment. So what are we saying here? It's not the thief. It's the secondary thief. It's a thief that stole from a thief. And he doesn't pay the twofold payment because it's not stealing from the original owner. He doesn't pay the fourfold or fivefold payment for the same reason. Similarly, it's making the comparison that one who steals a consecrated animal from the house of its owner, we're talking about the original owner, and subsequently slaughters or sells it is exempt. So what's the reason? That's what we want to know. For it states with respect to the fines imposed on a thief, and it was stolen from the house of the man, but which implies not from the house of Hekdesh. So it's in regard to that Rav Shimon says in our Mishnah, if you steal and slaughter or sell a consecrated animal for which the owner bears responsibility, he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. What's the reason? Because we can apply to him the verse, and it was stolen from the house of man. So what we're basically saying here is that if a thief steals an ox or a sheep, and then a second thief steals that animal from him, the second thief is not liable to the twofold payment for his theft, nor to the fourfold or fivefold payment should he subsequently slaughter or sell the stolen animal. And if you remember this pasuk in Shmot, Exodus chapter 22, verse 6, a thief is liable to the twofold penalty for theft and to the fourfold or fivefold penalty for the sale or slaughter of a stolen animal, only when the animal was stolen from the house of the man, inverted commas, from that verse in Exodus. Okay, which means what is the house of a man? It's a private person. It's not when the animal was stolen from Hekdesh. So in other words, if the first thief consecrated the animal to Hekdesh and the second thief stole it from Hekdesh, there's no twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment that the second thief has to pay. So this Tana basically maintains that all consecrated animals, whether or not the owner bears responsibility for them, and what we mean by the owner here is the thief that says, listen, if anything goes wrong with this, I'll bring another animal instead. Or he doesn't, and he says, well, this is just for consecration. Still, at the point where he's given it over to Hekdesh, and it's no longer the property of the owner who consecrated them, so a thief that steals Kodashim isn't liable to the twofold payment for the theft, nor for the fourfold or fivefold payment for the subsequent slaughter or sale. But it's a different case, Rabbi Shimon says, that the owner bears responsibility for the animal. In fact, in this case, we're talking about that a thief steals the animal from the original owner, waits for basically Yush to take place and a change of domain, and it's going from the word Kul into Hekdesh. and whatever the case may be. And he then donates it to the temple, but he says that if anything happens to the animal, he will make good and replace it. Now, if a second thief steals it from him, in that case, he does suffer financial loss, and therefore he's got a vested interest in the animal. So the second thief in that case has technically stolen from a private person, because even though it's to hectares, that private person is signing liability for it, and then is liable to the penalties of theft. Okay, so that's what we're saying. Now the Gemara asks how Rabbi Shimon could make a thief liable for slaughtering a consecrated animal for which the owner bears responsibility. So that's a different, slightly just a different question. So we've learned about Rabbi Shimon that he says that a slaughter that is not fit. What did we mean, Kevin, when we said before slaughter that was not fit? When we talked about it before, what did we mean?
It's got, hold on, it's got a mum.
Yes.
A defect.
Yes. So in other words, if you steal an animal and you're trying to consecrate it, and there's no fourfold or fivefold payment because it's got a mum, a blemish, or it's a treifa, and you can't derive benefit by either eating it or consecrating it, the thief doesn't have to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. That was in 70a. Excellent. So Rabbi Shimon says that a slaughter that is not fit, that doesn't render the animal fit for consumption or any benefit, is not called a slaughter that renders the thief liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. But the thief's slaughter of a consecrated animal outside the temple courtyard is also not a slaughter that is fit. So what are we saying here is that if you look at kochim that are slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, they're disqualified and unfit for consumption. Okay, and what does this mean in a nutshell? Is the question is, how then does Rabbi Shimon rule that a thief who steals and slaughters a consecrated animal for which the owner bears responsibility, because the original owner is turning around and saying that he would have made good if the animal goes stolen, then it's no longer in hekdesh. So we're talking about the thief that steals it already from hekdesh. Why would he be responsible? Because you can't use an animal that's slaughtered out of the temple courtyard if it's consecrated. So the Gemara answers, look, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon's ruling in our Mishnah refers to when a thief slaughtered an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard for the sake of the original owner. So what it means here is that the Gemara had thought that Rabbi Shimon referred to a thief who slaughters the stolen animal outside the temple. Okay, so obviously in that case there's no four or fivefold payment. But the Gemara is clarifying that actually Rav Yochanan explains that Rabbi Shimon refers to where the stolen kodashim was an unblemished animal, which is actually fit, Kevin, exactly as you said, because it's unblemished, to be brought as a temple offering. And the thief brought the stolen animal to the temple courtyard and slaughtered it with the intent that it be an offering for the original owner. Okay, so again, it's saying it's slightly different. This is an unblemished animal. It was brought into the temple courtyard, which means it's fit for slaughter. And the intention was that it's an offering for the original owner. They must have had a very strange relationship if somebody steals it from the original owner and intends to give it on behalf of the original owner. I can't work this out. Anyway,
yeah, it's weird.
It's weird. In this case, the offering is indeed valid, and the slaughter makes it fit for consumption. Hence, the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal. Now, guys, you should have a question here.
Yeah, I have one. Why? Because it's supposed to be from the house of a man, so this doesn't make sense, really.
Okay, so it does from one particular reason, because
Unless the original owner is still the owner.
No, let's go back to the previous point. No, let's go. You missed something in the previous point, but there should be a separate question on this. So what we are saying is, Gavin, here, is as the original owner, if you've given it to hekdesh, if it's stolen, it now belongs to heaven, so to speak, or the Most High, Hashem. So therefore, the pasuk says in Shmot chapter 22, verse 6 in Exodus, that in order for the thief to be eligible for the twofold payment or the fourfold or fivefold penalty for selling or slaughtering the animal, it actually has to be from the house of the man, in other words, a private person. The minute the original owner gave it to Hekdesh and it was stolen from the temple courtyard, it's no longer the thief actually stole it from Hekdesh. He didn't steal it from a private person, so there's no penalty of a twofold or fourfold or fivefold payment. That's what he's saying. So it's saying that maybe in this case, the only time he's eligible, even though the original owner gave it to Hekdesh, is if he had it in its possession, okay, the original owner, and he hadn't in his mind told, I mean, he basically assigned it to Hekdesh. He hadn't given it over to the temple. But if he had in mind that this or any animal would do, and it was stolen, he doesn't have to give it to Hekdesh because he never made a declaration that if anything happened to this animal, it will be replaced by another Olah offering. If the original owner made that declaration, then it doesn't matter if the thief stole it and it had been assigned to Hekdesh. He has to make the twofold payment for the stealing of the animal and a fourfold or fivefold payment for the slaughter. Why? Because, just let me finish a sentence. Let me finish one more sentence. Because the original owner has said that if anything happened to this animal while in his possession, he would replace it with another one for Hekdesh. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon says we apply the verse, if he stole from the house of the man, even if it was part of Hekdesh, because of the cost to that individual. What was your question?
But I thought you said it was stolen from the courtyard, not from. I understand if he's assigned it and it's sitting in his house, that's fine. But you said in the you just said just prior to this comment that it was stolen from the courtyard. That's the part that I don't understand.
Okay, either way, it's the same principle. So let me give you two scenarios. It's an excellent question. If it was stolen from the temple courtyard, and he made a declaration and said, I will replace this if it goes missing, the temple treasury is going to come to us and said, listen, it was stolen. You have to make good and replace it with another one of your animals. In that case, if the thief is caught, he has to pay the twofold for stealing the animal, because even though it belongs to Hekdesh, the owner had a written guarantee or verbal guarantee that he'd replace it with another animal. So we can apply the pasuk that he stole from the house of the man, even if it was in the temple's possession, because the individual sought to be a guarantor if anything happened to that animal once it was assigned to Hekdesh, whether or not, Gavin, it was in his own house or whether or not it was in the house of the temple courtyard. As long as he agreed to be the guarantor. But if he assigned it to Hekdesh and he hadn't taken it to the temple yet, and it's not his technically, but he provided no guarantee of replacement, the thief wouldn't have to pay him the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment because he stole it from Hekdesh. So it doesn't matter where it is, it matters what he said that he would do as a guarantor, because technically it was assigned to Hekdesh or him, one of those two, no matter which premises it was in. So it depends if he had a written guarantee or not, or a verbal guarantee. So that's an excellent question. So it applies in both cases. But what it's saying is now is, what do you mean he owes a four or fivefold payment if the person assigns responsibility? Because what's happened here is, how can it be called a slaughter if the thief slaughtered the consecrated animal outside the temple courtyard? Because if he slaughtered it, for example, when it was still in the guy's original possession, or the thief took it to his house, even though it had been consecrated, you can't slaughter a consecrated animal outside the temple courtyard, because then it's ineligible for consumption. And therefore, since you can't use it, why would we apply the four or fivefold penalty for the slaughtering of the ox or the sheep or the ox? That was the Gemara's question. And the Gemara's answer to that was, actually, if you look at Rav Dimi from Eretz Yisrael, who said in the name of Rav Yochanan, we're talking about here an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard for the sake of the original owner. That was his answer, which means that in fact it wasn't consecrated yet, it was unblemished, and therefore it's known as, I think, a kodshim kalem as opposed to a kodashim, which means it's at a lower level, is that it's assigned to the temple, consecrated because it's unblemished until it develops a mum, as Kevin said. But at that point, it's not a problem. It was actually slaughtered inside the temple courtyard. He was saying that the Gemara didn't word it properly for the sake of the original owner. But the question that should come up in your minds is twofold. It's a very weird thing. If he steals it from the original owner, takes it to the temple at which it was meant to go anyway, and sacrifices it on behalf, slaughters and sacrifices on behalf of the original owner. The whole thing's weird, to be honest. It's weird. It doesn't make sense. Then you've got a second.
It doesn't sound like a theft. It just sounds like a task.
Exactly. So that you do that for a friend. You save them the trip and then dedicate something in their honor because it's their animal. And then that's Gavin, why the second question would come, which means, what do you mean there's a 4 or 5-fold payment? He never slaughtered it for himself. He slaughtered it for the original owner. In other words, the original owner put it aside for temple use anyway. So then he slaughtered it and didn't keep it for himself, but he slaughtered it on behalf of the original owner in order to take it to the temple. So why would there be a 4 or 5-fold penalty when the original owner wanted to do that anyway? And the Gemara objects to that answer with the exact same question. But if so, why is the thief liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment while the principal has been returned to the owner? Which means since the animal was offered for the sake of the original owner and it counts as a valid offering for him, the thief has in effect returned the stolen animal to him and used it for the purpose at which the original owner wanted to use it for, and he shouldn't be liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. That's what Rashi says. Okay? So the Gemara answers, Rav Yitzchak bar Ravin said, we are dealing with where the blood sporting was never applied to the altar. So the offering became invalidated, and the principal was not returned to the owner because, in other words, he did take it to the temple courtyard. He did shecht it. It was fit for offering. But at the point that the whole point of the offering is to spill the blood. Remember Rav Schottenstein how taught us this on Sunday? Yeah?
Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, so in other words, at the time of the slaughter, the offering was still valid, and the slaughter constituted a fit slaughter. And the minute it constitutes the right rules, it renders the thief liable to a 4 or 5-fold payment. And the reason is because everything was good until that point. Had he put the blood on the altar, he would have fulfilled what the original owner wanted, and there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. But everything up until that point is kosher. If he slaughtered it outside the temple courtyard, it's an ineligible sacrifice, so there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. All there is a double payment for theft. Okay. So the Gemara brings an alternative answer, apart from Rav Yitzchak bar Ravin, who was talking about the blood sport was never applied to the altar. So another answer, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon's ruling refers to where the thief slaughtered unblemished offerings inside the temple courtyard, not for the sake of the original owner. Now, guys, this makes more sense. Because an offering slaughtered not for the sake of the owner is still valid, because the blood can still be sprinkled upon the altar. It belongs to Hekdesh now. Its sacrificial parts can be burnt on the altar, and its meat actually can be eaten. But it's because it's not accredited to the original owner, and the owner said that he'd make good, the original owner, that if that animal he didn't bring as a sacrifice, he would replace it. The owner is now going to have to bring another animal in its stead. So since the offering hasn't been accredited to the owner, but only to the theft of the person that started from the owner, the principal hasn't been returned to him. And the thief now, guys, is liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment, okay, for performing a valid slaughter. So the offering is a valid one. It just hasn't been given by the original owner. Now the original owner has to make restitution and bring another animal. So there's one alternative answer. Reish Lakish says Rabbi Shimon's ruling that the thief who steals and slaughters kodashim for which the owner bears responsibility is liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment refers to where the thief slaughtered blemished offerings outside the temple courtyard, because blemished kodashim are disqualified as offerings. So because they're not offered inside the temple courtyard, they're actually rendered permitted for consumption by slaughtering them outside the temple courtyard. Why? Because they're blemished. So there you're not allowed to sacrifice them in the temple courtyard. And because it's outside, and because it has a blemish, it's actually allowed to be slaughtered outside. And it's fit for consumption as a non-consecrated animal, and therefore the principle wasn't returned to the original owner. That's why the thief makes a 4 or 5-fold payment. Any questions up to now, guys?
Yeah, no, just a comment, not a question.
Sure.
Maybe Kevin has, or Arthur. Just a comment. That thief who's putting that offering up to Hashem, I mean, that can't be. I'm just saying, what a shocking offering to give something that you stolen to offer it up. It's horrific. It can't be really considered an offering from Shemayim. Definitely not.
So the irony is, to me, what you're saying makes absolute sense. It's all pathological. I mean, how do you steal, which Hashem says don't steal, and then consecrate it? Because basically, the whole thing of it is an animal that you stole. Basically, an animal that you stole isn't accepted if it's still considered somebody else's property. So, Gavin, 2 things have to take place, or 3 things, depending on the opinion. Is Yurush, despair from the original owner, a change of location to Hekdesh, and a change of name which occurs automatically from Chulin to Hekdesh. So those 3 things means it's no longer the original owners. But it's bizarre that you think Hashem would be happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Dad, it's kind of like stealing a pair of tefillin and then in front of the broch on.
Yes,
doesn't make
Exactly.
sense.
Arthur, that's a perfect example.
Good example.
It's a great example. But you have that. You've got like shuls, like there's one particular Sephardi shul that half the guys that have built the shul are mafia guys. There's like Israeli mafia guys. It's just bizarre. I don't get it. I don't get it, mate.
Yeah, it's crazy then. It's very crazy.
But obviously,
In fact, you can't take, if you're a charity or a shul, any of those people that look for donations, you can't take donations from a crook if you know it's stolen money or bad money or tainted money. In theory, but they do take.
It's terrible. I'll tell you why they do it, though. I've worked out why. They think it's a hechsher. So say somebody gives R1 million to charity, but they're stealing. They think they've laundered their money spiritually. Because they've done a good thing with it, they're entitled now to not feel bad about the crimes they committed. People are funny, eh? So let's just go on. We've got like 9 minutes. So the Gemara asked, Rav Elazar pondered, according to Rav Yochanan, he explains that the slaughter is deemed a fit slaughter because Rabbi Shimon refers to where the thief slaughtered an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard. Does then the slaughter render the animal permitted for consumption, while the subsequent throwing of the blood on the altar renders the animal permitted for consumption? Okay. So in other words, how can Ravin say that Rabbi Shimon refers to where the thief slaughtered an unblemished kodashim in the temple courtyard? Because valid kodashim are not rendered fit to eat until they are slaughtered and their blood is thrown on the altar. So in other words, at the time of the slaughter didn't render the animal permitted for consumption, and it's technically a slaughter that's unfit. So what we want to find out is if it hasn't transpired yet, how does it mean it's okay? Because we're talking about the answer where the blood was going to be thrown on the altar, but it wasn't. But it's still considered a fit slaughter. So the Gemara is asking, well, until the whole deed is done properly, how can it be deemed a fit slaughter up until that last point? Because it ain't right until it's completed. So basically, the subsequent throwing of the blood on the altar renders the animal permitted for consumption. And according to Reish Lakish, who explains that the slaughter is deemed a fit slaughter because Rabbi Shimon refers to where he slaughtered a blemished offering outside the temple courtyard because it's blemished, guys. Does the slaughter render the animal permitted for consumption, while the subsequent redemption of the blemished animal renders the animal permitted for consumption? So what it's saying is, you can't eat the meat of a blemished offering until it's redeemed. So at the time of the slaughter of the blemished offering, the slaughter didn't render the animal fit to eat. So how then can it be considered a fit slaughter, which would make the thief liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment? And even in Reish Lakish's case, since the time of the slaughter, the blemished offering remains to be redeemed, the meat is considered fit for consumption immediately upon the slaughter, which is therefore deemed a fit slaughter. So basically, we want to know, like, how can you jump the gun here? So the Gemara rejects Rav Elazar's question. It slipped the mind of Rav Elazar the following opinion of Rabbi Shimon: any blood that stands to be thrown on the altar is considered as if it was already thrown. Okay? And anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was already redeemed. Okay? So, in Reish Lakish's case, since at the time of the slaughter the blemished offering stands to be redeemed, the meat is considered fit for consumption immediately upon the slaughter, and it's deemed a fit slaughter. So he's saying in advance, if all the other check boxes are ticked, it seems that it's okay. Let's just go on, because some of those final points, like I'm not even in the headset to understand what these sacrifices really mean. We've got 6 minutes. Let's just go through the sacrificing part, and then we can get to the part that makes, like, we're more used to. So the Gemara demonstrates that Rabbi Shimon indeed subscribes to these two principles. What principle? Any blood that stands to be thrown on the altar is considered as if it was already thrown. And anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as though it were already redeemed. We know that Rabbi Shimon holds that any blood on the altar is considered as though it was thrown from the following brisa. Rabbi Shimon says himself, there is nosar that contracts food tumah. So let me just tell you what nosar is. We learned this in Sanhedrin, Gavin, about somebody that's liable for kares. So if there's something called a pigul. So a pigul, not a piggy, that's also treif, but a pigul is a sacrifice that's eaten after its allotted time. In other words, in your mind, you know you're going to break the rules, and you have to eat a sacrifice within a given time. So what is this nosar? It's a similar theme. It's sacrificial meat that was actually left over and not consumed within the time allotted for its consumption. So any such meat, guys, must be burned. What's the source? Shmot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 10, chapter 29, verse 34, Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 7, verse 17, and it's forbidden for consumption or for benefit. So any sacrificial meat that was left over and not consumed within the time allotted for its consumption is forbidden for consumption, and it must be burnt. Okay? So how can you have noseh that contracts food tumah? And there's noseh that does not contract food tumah. So what do we mean? Is that the concept of tumah means that it contains impurity. So the concept is anything that you can't get benefit from can't get tumah. Because tumah is generally infected with a vessel or clothing, which is, as you know, a utensil. How can clothing be a utensil? Because a utensil means of utility, of use. So something that can contract tumah is a person that touches another dead body or whatever. And what it's saying is, if meat is not fit rendered for benefit because it's past the sacrificial time at which you can consume it, it can't get food tumah generally because it's of no benefit to anybody. So tumah is a spiritual concept. So any food that is not susceptible for benefit technically can't get food tumah. But anyone that is fit for benefit can get food tumah. So we understand why it does not contract food tumah. That makes sense. But how can it get tumah? So let me just explain to you the rationale. If you look at Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 11, verse 34, the Torah is discussing that if you have food in an earthenware utensil, like a pot or whatever, any food that is edible, it becomes impure. So the general consensus is that the verse means to say that if it's halachically forbidden for consumption, it generally can't contract tumah. But there are cases where it can. So let me put it to you like this, is that food, if it's food that you can give to non-Jews, even though it can't be eaten by Jews, is susceptible to tumah. But food that is forbidden for benefit at all, that you can't even give to a non-Jew or feed it to your dogs, is not susceptible to food tumah because there's no use whatsoever. So basically in this brisa, Rabbi Shimon modifies the ruling, and he teaches that it applies only to food that was never permitted for benefit. So food that was permitted for benefit, even if it was only at one time, remains susceptible to food tumah, even if it becomes later prohibited. So what's the relevance here? Is kodashim meat that had a moment of fitness after it was slaughtered, at which point becomes susceptible to food tumah, remains susceptible to food tumah, even after it becomes nosar, which means you've crossed the deadline where it can't be benefited. But any nosar that had a moment of never had a moment of fitness, is not susceptible to food tumah. So what are we talking about here in a nutshell? Is that this is the thing that it was rendered fit for consumption, except he never threw the blood in the altar. So at the point that he never threw the blood in his altar, you couldn't use it anymore. But up until that point, it was eligible for consumption, and therefore it could get food tumah. So that's his proof. But we'll discuss it tomorrow, what that means in more detail. Guys, thank you very much. Any questions?
I'm good, thank you. It was very good.
Do you understand this? Do you understand this tumah concept, or can we go over it tomorrow a little bit?
No, I think recap it to